And we're going to be looking at the life of Saint Francis of Paola, his early life. We've already seen how he was called from before birth with various miracles and signs. Today we're going to have a look at his early life with other miracles and his formation. Hello friends, on this channel where we look at the lives of great saints, often when the world is kind of going into a difficult situation, into a crisis we could say, Providence himself, God himself, sends a great saint in order to restore the balance, the order and the tranquility with God. So we want to see their incredible examples and what their spirituality is about. So we're going to be looking at Saint Francis of Paola. He was, like Padre Pio, a humble miracle worker. Profuse miracles followed him everywhere, and his prophecies influenced nations. And these stories come from the book Saint Francis of Paola, God's Miracle Worker Supreme. Now previously we saw how Francis of Paola had just been called by Saint Francis of Assisi himself in a dream, in a vision. It was now time. He must come and join the monastery. He had to fulfill a promise his parents had made. They took him to the monastery, he put the habit on, and he was just 13 years of age at this stage. And he was fulfilling this promise. Apparently there were three important miracles that followed him through the monastery, and everyone was amazed to see these. But it was really the time for Francis of Paola's formal education. And for 1 year he learned to read and write, to study scriptures, and especially the life of Saint Francis of Assisi. He assisted at Mass and he learned all about the church's functions and beliefs. Now the first miracle. And we have to remember, Francis is 13 years old at this stage, and it was a miracle of bilocation. So young Francis was helping in the church at the altar during Mass, and he was also simultaneously seen performing chores in the kitchen. So he was in two places at once, and there were witnesses at both places. So we can't explain how that happens. The second miracle, he was preparing dinner. So this is young Francis preparing dinner, and he had cut everything up, put it in the pot. It was ready to boil up. He put wood underneath. There was no flame yet, and he decided, well, there's time. Let me go and pray a little bit. And then he became lost in contemplation of God. Time passed, he lost track of time, and some hungry monks arrived a little later on, and they discovered their meal was far from ready. They were hungry, and so they complained bitterly to young Francis about this meal. Well, Francis, realizing his mistake, his failure, jumped up, he ran over to the pot. Apparently, he made the sign of the cross over the pot, and it burst into flame. The wood underneath burst into flame, and within seconds the pot was boiling, and to everyone's absolute astonishment, the food was ready practically on time. And apparently it did taste better than usual as well. And the third miracle attested to St. Francis. He was once again assisting at Mass, and he realized that the fire had not been brought in for the incense burner. There were no coals. So he ran off into the kitchen, and with his bare hands he took coals out of the fire in the kitchen. He put them into his tunic, ran back, and then once again took these coals and put them into the incense burner. Everyone was astounded. He hadn't burnt himself. He hadn't burnt his tunic. How could they explain that? So news of these miracles got around the place and eventually reached the bishop. And he now had to go and investigate. And he called Francis in, and they spoke, and he became convinced that Francis was completely sincere, and these miracles must have been genuine. And the bishop came back various other times to speak with Francis again. He was quite impressed with young Francis. But at the monastery, Francis really loved just to go and retire into some remote corner and there to pray and lose himself in prayer and ecstasy before God. Well, the year came to an end, and all the friars realized there's someone extraordinary here, young Francis, and they tried to persuade him to stay, but it seems that Francis had realized that it was not his calling in life. He went back home, and then with his parents they all made a pilgrimage up to Assisi, the town of Assisi, where Saint Francis of Assisi came from. And he visited all the shrines en route. And he became so impressed, more and more impressed with Il Poverello, that is Saint Francis of Assisi. And here he found his calling, his mission in life. And he was just 14 years of age. So that's similar to Padre Pio. From a very young age, he knew what his calling was. And in Francis of Paola's case, it was to become a hermit. So he went back to his parents' land, and there he found a remote barn. It was very dilapidated, but he fixed it up a little bit, improved it, made the roof waterproof, and there he spent his time in study, in prayer, and in meditation. Just 14 years of age, and he just ate a meager diet, apparently, and offered up all of his abstinences to God. Well, apparently Francis was perfectly happy in the solitude. But people realized there's a holy man here, and so they would come and visit, and they wanted to get their questions answered and all sorts of things. These disruptions just continued. So he had no option, and he headed off into the forest. He walked up the stream for miles and miles, and eventually came to a cave, which became his new hermitage. And he improved it a little bit. He made improvements there, tidied it up, and he used to spend his time studying and praying there, and it became known as the Grotto of Penance. And there, pretty much like John the Baptist, young Francis lived off the land, eating berries and drinking from the stream. And so he continued his formation here, and apparently the devil used to arrive and tempt him. He used to have these struggles with the devil, and he had to learn to resist the devil, and he grew in strength and in virtue there. We don't know much more about these incidents, but he would walk miles and miles to attend Mass in some local village, and then he'd walk back, and he'd just spend the rest of his time in prayer and meditation, lose himself in ecstasy before God. 5 years later, so he's now 19 years old, some hunters came through the forest, and they were chasing a goat. They were hunting a goat, and the goat ran straight into young Francis's cave. He picked the goat up, and he walked out with the goat, and of course the hunters were quite shocked, because this goat seemed quite at home with him, wasn't frightened of this young saint. So they went back to the village, and they spoke to people, and now Francis had been discovered. Word got out where the hermit is, and soon devout people, all sorts of people, they would arrive, and they would ask for his counsel and his prayers, begging him to help him. And so ended 5 years. He was now 19 years old, and Francis took this goat incident as a new era had begun. So we've seen how he was called by Saint Francis of Assisi himself to 1 year in the monastery. And then he continued his formation for a further 5 years as a hermit, lost, living in a cave, just contemplating God in a state of ecstasy. And now Francis of Paola's hidden life had come to an end. And we're going to see in the next period of his life miracles beyond belief. Please do subscribe to our channel. You're going to have to subscribe to this channel to see how Saint Francis of Paola became the patron of seafarers. All you have to do is click that subscribe and the reminder bell too. Please do help us with our apostolate as well by sharing the videos, especially by liking this video. And we have various other videos on the end screen. Please do continue watching.
Egressus est Iesus cum discipulis suis transtorrentem